Hello, Jamie.
Hi, Peter.
Look at that. We're wearing the same kind of sweaters.
We're both old men.
We're sweater buddies.
The definition of an old man is the number of cardigans you own.
I have a lot of them. My family makes fun of me.
So do I. I'm sort of perpetually shopping for them as well.
Me too. Often I'm very disappointed by the ones I find. I'm like, oh, this will be perfect. And it's not.
That's exactly how I feel about that. That's how I feel about this one.
Yeah,
right
so
now.
this is like my security blanket, the one I'm wearing right now.
I've got one that
Wonderful
same. I've got one that I love, right? One that's amazing, and then I've got one that's a step down from that, and then a bunch that I don't wear.
So funny.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay.
Good.
This week we talked to Earl Franks from NAESP, the National Association of Elementary School Principals. I met him at a conference. I was speaking in Arizona. He was attending, and the two of us hit it off. And in fact, a principal who hired me to be a teacher had served with him at NAESP. And so the two of us got to make fun of Mike Schooley.
Tell me a little bit about you hitting it off with him.
Well, it's interesting because as you might expect, someone in a national role has the understanding that on a podcast, they might be a little bit more reserved. And so the themes are still the same. I mean, we talked about collaboration and partnership, that no one organization can move forward without the others. So I think what you'll hear in the conversation is we got a really clear picture around advocacy, because he feels like that's a big part of his role in terms of representing all the principals around the U.S.
There were a couple of comments that I thought were really interesting, and I really enjoyed. Maybe this is where you could put another post-it from Jamie next to your computer that says, I think Peter asked good questions this time.
That's just a gold star.
yeah, it's a gold star.
Why don't we listen to my conversation with Earl Franks, and then we'll come back and talk about that.
That sounds great.
Let us also remind you, you're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Also, if you enjoy this episode and if you've learned something today, please consider following the show or leaving us a 5-star review. This really does help the podcast more than I can say, and it allows us to reach more and more people. And that would just mean the world to us. So thank you so much. Imperfect Leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech language pathologist positions within your district? Kind of a silly question, because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools. Today on An Imperfect Leader, our guest is Earl Franks, the Executive Director of the National Association of Elementary School Principals, NAESP. Earl, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you, Peter. I'm honored to be here.
I'm honored, by the way, to have you. I truly am. You and I met in Arizona, I think, at the Arizona School Administrators Conference. And I felt so fortunate to spend that time with you. What I've learned about you since then was certainly that you had an important role leading the Council for Leaders in Alabama, and that you were also inducted in the Alabama Education Leadership Hall of Fame. That's quite an honor. You've served as a building principal, and you were an award-winning band director. And I was also interested to know that, and I was really inspired by this, that you are a Paul Harris Fellow with Rotary more than once. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate throughout my career, certainly with wonderful students. When I was a teacher and school leader, the many colleagues that I had in the school building, the school district level, and from an association perspective at the state level in Alabama and during my tenure at NAESP. Wonderful colleagues from a staff perspective, as well as, the members that we work with and represent in the association world. So, yeah, very fortunate. And, just something I'm really passionate about is Rotary and what Rotary International does throughout the world, helping people have better lives. And so that's an important part of my life as well.
That's fantastic. Well, I was a Rotarian in Columbia, Missouri. Our school district also had a relationship with a university in Shanghai. And so twice I was obligated to go to a board meeting in Shanghai, and it sounds wonderful, although it was just 48 hours. So it was quite a trip to go for such a short time. I was coming out of an elevator once in this hotel in Shanghai, and I was talking to a nice gentleman, and as the door opened, people started singing, ROTARY, we are Rotary. And I thought, what that? Yeah. And I thought,
that spells Rotary.
That spells Rotary, right? And that spells Rotary, right? And so I'm thinking, wow, that's so nice. I'm a Rotarian, service over self, 4-way test. And then I was asked to move to the side because I was talking with the Rotary International president. He was visiting Shanghai. There was an enormous crowd there to welcome him. And anyhow, I wonder if we could focus on NAESP for a moment. And because the podcast audience is a mix of principals and superintendents, many principals who are aspiring or at least thinking about pursuing the superintendency. And so would you talk a little bit about NAESP, its advocacy for school leaders, and then maybe talk a little bit about its collaboration with NAESP and AASA, just how you work together to advocate on shared goals?
Absolutely. Well, first at NAESP, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, we provide support and services for the nation's pre-K through grade 8 school leaders. And we focus primarily on professional learning, communications, awards recognition, student programs, advocacy, and other benefits that help them. So that's kind of our core work within NAESP. In terms of working with, say, NAESP and many other organizations, we are involved here in the DC area and throughout the United States. We're involved in various coalitions or organizations. A couple examples, the Learning First Alliance, which is based here in the DC area, but it's all the major educational organizations. We work as part of those AASA and NAESP. With those groups, the Committee for Education Funding, which is over 100 education groups that support funding for education, the National Policy Board for Educational Administrators, we're all involved in that work. For a number of years, we had a program, the National Aspiring Principals Academy with SA and NAESP. We have kind of placed that program on hold for the time being. We're also involved collaboratively with working on the principal school leader pipeline, educator pipeline, and certainly the future of public education. And then funding here at the federal level, certainly with Title I, Title II, other federal programs, good policy, and certainly the advocacy area. EdLink, which focuses on E-rate. We're involved in that as well. And, working with the Department of Education on policy and those type things. So, yeah, a lot of coalitions, a lot of collaboration goes on with not just NAESP and AASA, but certainly the other education organizations.
You just listed quite a number of initiatives for which you and your team are active, not just members, but actively involved in either making change or sustaining important pieces. I don't know much about the National Policy Board. I wonder if you could give an example of something that has come out of that work?
Yeah, the PEASL standards for school and leaders. So this organization tries to work with the standards that we believe that educational leaders should go through in their preparation program. And so we've had a number of states who have adopted the PEASL standards, but that's just an example of organizations, again, NAESP, AASA, NAESP, we're involved in that work, and we're the actual policy board trying to improve the role of educational administration in every state and working with state departments of education, the preparation programs, specifically on standards that help school leaders, hopefully their preparation be better.
So if I'm trying to sort of draw a line or at least understand, so it's this group may design, create, and confirm a set of standards that they would expect for principals. So everything from curriculum and instruction to engagement with their community, those types of things. And then they inform or advise the state departments of education around so that there's some uniformity or consistency nationwide on what makes a great principal. And then the universities and colleges of education take those as a way to inform what they're going to do as part of their preparation. Does that sort of walk through the system as I understand it, or as you were describing it?
Yeah, that's a great description, Peter.
Okay.
Again, we work to create the standards, and our hope is that state departments of education preparation programs will adopt the standards.
Right.
Around NELP, which is the National Education Leadership Preparation Program recognition standards. And, it's just, again, our hope is to help improve the role of the educational administration.
Gotcha. So a week ago, I had Stephen Pruitt on our program, a former Kentucky state superintendent, and then now leading a coalition of southern states. And I imagine the two of you know each other. And I was curious just about how he might have engaged in this work. And I'm sure that there was some overlap, certainly.
He works with SREB, which is Southern Regional Education Board. And so they're not as involved, certainly, in the standards as we are. The principal standards, they're kind of work on the perimeter of that. But certainly he is familiar as having been state chief in Kentucky of our work.
Gotcha. If you're just joining us, our guest today is NAESP Executive Director Earl Franks. Earl, in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension. It's called nested patterns. And nested patterns is the muscle of an organization. It speaks to how people behave, how they behave with one another. And high levels of collaboration is part of nested patterns. And the examples that you just gave are just how different organizations work together to, it really just shows the power of collaboration. And I'm curious, with a changing political landscape, collaboration is going to be necessary in order for children to thrive. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And I wonder, would you talk a little bit about some of the ways that NAESP is advising leaders to advocate for public education?
Yeah, regardless of the political party that may be at the state house, certainly the majority in the state house, or certainly in Congress, but we always encourage school leaders to share positive things that are going on in their schools with political leaders. Again, whether they're Republican or Democrat, what I found this is my 39th year in education, I found that politicians, for the most part, are generally supportive of their local schools. They're not so supportive necessarily at the national level, but at the local level, not even at the state level, but at the local level, they typically support and are very proud of what's going on in the local school. But I think
it's so funny because it makes me think of, when you ask people on a letter grade, A through F, tell me about how you feel about public education, and they may say C. And I say, well, but what about your own local school? Oh, A, my own local school, A, absolutely.
Absolutely. So it's incumbent upon all school leaders to share the positive work that's going on in public schools every day with those that represent them at the state, at the local, actually, the state, and at the federal level. And what I've also found is, for the most part, everyone wants what's best for students. Now, there's different ways to what's best. There's different interpretations of that. And we can agree to disagree on certain of the path to get there. But I think you've got to have a relationship with those folks that represent you. Again, regardless of the party, because I think focusing on students, really the academic achievement, social, emotional issues, helping kids get better, you just got to share those things. Invite them to visit your school in your district. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
You can't shut down communication. You got to have those conversations. And because I think in the end, hopefully they want to do what's best for the students of just a different path to get there. Stories matter. Stories really do matter, like federal funds. How are we using federal funds in our school, in our local school, in our district? Give examples of how those funds are being used, the improvements and the gains that are being made. And to me, that's where it all starts.
I wonder if you could think of an example. First of all, a couple of things. One, I totally agree, is engaging in a friendly way with showing, first of all, gratitude for their vote for public education. And then secondly, being able to tell your story about the things that are happening in your building. I was almost going to say innovative. I think that sometimes scares principals because they say, I'm not doing anything that's so innovative. And yet when you hear things like buddy backpack program, where children get to go home with food for the weekend so that they know that they've got food for the weekend before they return to school, because schools so often are the primary avenue for children to eat in terms of good nutrition. And I say that's innovation. Or calling a parent on a day that a child had a great day, not just on the days that the kids are struggling. That's an innovation. I mean, it's not, sometimes I think we get stuck on that word. And I think those are good examples of how your school becomes a beacon for a community. And I think that's something that legislators care about, is that their community is thriving and that there's this sense of hope and that school is a place where people convene. And I know you travel all over the country. When I saw you in Arizona, you were going here and then there. And so I'm really surprised to find you in DC, quite frankly. And so I'm wondering, are there some examples that just come to mind that are just sort of on top of the head that you have seen that principals and superintendents who are listening would say, oh, it's that? I can do that. That sounds like a good idea.
I'd hate to start listing
Sure.
things because, as you mentioned, I travel around to many states and conferences, and I think you hit the nail on the head about the word innovate. Some folks say, I'm not an innovator. I think if we shift that to maybe what are some best practices that you're using that's working in your school, in your district for students, improvements that are being made, share those best practices, some that you've listed here. There's just, every time I go to a conference and I sit in a session that a principal school leader is sharing about best practices that are working in their school, that they're sharing with their colleagues, share those best practices with folks that represent you in the political world, because they need to know that. They see the news, and we know news only picks up generally the negative piece. If the bus driver was caught with marijuana or something like that, that makes the news. But the positive things that are going on, those best practices, as Ray McNulty would say, best is in the past. So let's focus on next practices.
Cool.
So whether they're best or next, whatever. So there's so many of those. Just look in your state. You don't have to look outside your building. What are some things that are working well for you and your students, and share those things?
Yeah, I was at EIE this year and I ran into an individual. It was mostly legislators. So it was a legislator who was telling me about a principal he was really proud of, because he said, we keep talking about the teacher shortage, and there certainly is one state in each state and certainly nationwide. And he said that their district was a rural district. That's where he represents his region. And so there were individuals who were interested in becoming teachers, and the hangup was the student teaching component. They'd have to take off work to do their student teaching, and they couldn't afford to take off work. And so the principal decided to hire substitute teachers to cover them while they then were still employed, but then going and doing their student teaching piece. I say that's an innovation that legislators could hear about and say, I wonder what that might look like in my state or in my region. And then nationwide, certainly. So, I agree that it is certainly, there are simple ways that our elementary and our secondary principals and our superintendents are really thinking creatively that could be, I guess it's like if we just listen to them, some things could happen. So I'd like to ask you a question. I'm thinking about certainly, and again, it can be any administration that is in the White House, because there are times where students engage in activism. And so I expect that students, because there's talk of, eliminating the Department of Education, or there are certain rhetoric out there that will raise the level of interest in terms of activism and protest. And so I think, less so at the elementary level, certainly I think at the middle school level and definitely at the secondary level, that there's going to be protests similar to the years before and after the Brown decision, where in, I think it was November of 1951, a segregated black school in North Carolina engaged in an activity to say, what would an ideal school look like? And as they listed the things, they said, but that's what the white school has down the road. And so there were a number of protests leading up to Brown versus Board of Education. And I'm curious, I really do think this is going to be a reality in this political climate. And there are no good answers. This is an example of a complex issue where there's no good answer. I imagine, though, principals are going to be looking to their national association, NAESP, to help them sort of understand or at least guide them and advise them on how to support student rights while also maintaining a safe environment. And I'm just wondering what you and your team are thinking as we move into this next phase of education.
We don't see as much of this at the elementary level as certainly upper, middle, and then secondary. But for our members, potential members, we have the American School Counselors Student Council Association. And through that, we work with schools on around 4 areas with the student council. 1 is community service, which we think is very important. 2 would be student leadership. 3rd would be citizenship, and 4 is school spirit. And so we want to help schools grow student leaders. And so through our Student Council Association, that's one way. We also work with the National Association of Secondary School Principals, partner with them on the Elementary Honor Society. I know that they have middle level honor society because their core beliefs built on leadership as part of the Honor Society. Also, we partner with the United States Department of Education and NAESP around the Presidential Education Awards Program and the American Citizenship Award. And this is regardless of the administration, whoever's in power, we partner with them on this. And through that, there's Excellence Award, there are Achievement Awards, and then there's Citizenship Awards. So helping grow leadership skills, citizenship skills, certainly at the pre-K through grade 8 level is a priority for us. And within that, certainly you talk about what are your rights, certainly as a student, if you disagree, if you protest certain things within those core areas, certainly we talk about that. But we don't see as much about the, students that want to walk out of the building, protest as much as certainly our colleagues at the secondary level.
Gotcha. Yeah. Having been a superintendent in a university town, you might expect that we had children who, and sometimes at the direction of their parents and sometimes on their own volition, were encouraged to protest certain things throughout the years when I was there. And again, this was between both administrations, both parties. And so one of the things that we did was, if you were elementary, we created a space within the school that if you felt compelled that you wanted to walk out at a certain time, you could walk to that safe place, because we have an obligation to keep you safe within the building. An elementary kid cannot just walk out of the building and be considered, like at high school where they maybe have an open campus and have those rights or those privileges. Middle school, we did something similar also on the school ground, on the campus that we supervised as well. And then high school was different. What I appreciated about your answer, and I wish I could go back into time, is to look at those types of standards that you listed in terms of community service and student leadership, school spirit, because it allows us to maybe anchor ourselves and engage children in what would that look like, if there were a time where there was an interest in a freedom of speech event, and have them help design it. So it isn't a top-down decision where one would consider the adults are making all these decisions for us, and that's a violation of our rights, as opposed to we made this and created this together. And then I think that only bolsters one's belief that they have a stronger school spirit, or that there is a stronger sense of community because it was done together. I don't know if that resonates for you.
No, Peter, and I would argue certainly as a former school principal, I would suggest and work with students, it's like, there's a better way to protest and get your message out. Certainly from a leadership perspective, if you disagree with something, then walk out and protest. I mean, there are you can get more done in certain other ways. And I would work with students to help them, whether it's messaging, whether it's contacting through social media, whether it's letter writing, those type things, rather than walking out and protest and walking out of class and going to sit in a safe space. Let's do something more positive that you can really make more of a difference in other ways than just going to sit in the gym because you protest something.
I'm smiling not because I disagree with you. I'm smiling because there were certain kids that would be in the gym. You're here to protest? Yeah. Is it also math time? Yeah. I don't like math.
Sure. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I'm good. Will there be snack? Earl, I ask this question of every guest who comes on the show. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
by nature, we are all flawed. So we are all imperfect. Leadership, then to the next piece, leadership isn't perfect because we're not perfect as people, as leaders. And so sometimes many times our actions are imperfect. I certainly encourage folks to take chances. And oftentimes when you're willing to take a chance, the results may not be, what you had planned for or what you had hoped for. And many times, sometimes taking those chances, we don't get what we want or what we thought we would get. So I think that's just part of leadership. You've got to be willing to take chances, and there's some things, decisions that, regardless of how well planned they are, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, you've done your due diligence, things just don't turn out. Because again, we're starting with a flawed product, which is us. And as a result of that, flawed individuals make flawed decisions from time to time. So, that's just part of leadership.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being. And I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader, called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. Our guest today is NAESP Executive Director Earl Franks. Now, in this segment, we ask all our guests to deconstruct a decision that they've made in the past, and then we talk about it. So, what happened?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I've been pretty fortunate throughout my career. Not saying I hadn't made mistakes, I certainly have, but trying to focus on a couple of the top ones. I think from a school principal perspective, as well as from an association executive, probably hiring. Regardless of how much you plan, you do your due diligence, you hire people that ultimately it doesn't work out. You think it's a good fit at the time, but it didn't work out for various reasons. Sometimes it's the person, sometimes it's the institution, the organization. And so you have to non-renew or you have to terminate in the association world. All you can do is your best. My wife reminds me of that. In the end, all you can do is your best. And so I think you keep trying to do your best when it comes to hiring, employing the right people, because we know in hiring a fit, you look at certainly their resume and their qualifications and what they're responsible for, but a lot of times it's the fit. And sometimes the fit doesn't work. And so probably, again, throughout my career, I've made several of those. The people didn't work out. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean I'm a bad leader. It didn't work out for whatever reason. But you've got to be willing, if it's not a good fit, if it's not working out, you got to end that for the best of the students, or in my position, for the best for the association, the members you serve.
So I think hiring is an excellent example of one that many of us can relate to. And for those who are in the principalship, they certainly know, as they are for elementary, they're hiring often for teams and looking at the makeup of the team and trying to balance the personalities, the skills, the needs of that team. Sometimes they want to agitate for some change on that team that has sort of gotten into a fixed mindset about children or curriculum and instructional practices. And that can be a real challenge as well. Interested to know if you have one in mind, obviously maintaining confidentiality and people's anonymity, where I could begin to explore, what happened? Because there are certain examples where you say, I overlooked this one piece, or, so is there one that comes to mind that we could sort of dissect a little bit more?
Probably going back to when I was a principal, the person that we hired was highly qualified, excellent subject, wasn't the best in terms of classroom management. So ultimately that which the person didn't have a lot of experience coming into the position, had PhD in the subject, knew it well, just the classroom management just didn't work out, regardless of how much we tried to help. Colleagues tried to help, professional learning, super nice individual. The heart was in the right place, just couldn't handle the classroom management. And so we had to make that change and terminate that person. Another example would be highly qualified individual, but certainly in an elementary area around the grade level, the fit with the other teachers didn't work for various reasons. I'm going to go through all that. And so we had to make a change. At the association level, it's more of a skill set. Just didn't work out for the association. So those are just kind of three examples that
those are really helpful. And it's interesting when you think about individuals who have strong content knowledge. And as a principal, we get pretty excited about someone who is so strong in their content. And unfortunately, sometimes the piece around engaging 20, 30 children and being able to navigate behaviors and their needs becomes way too overwhelming for the content knowledge specialist, sort of like a general practitioner or a specialist who's then supposed to work clinic and have all these people coming in. That's not their skill set. And I'm curious, it sounds like what may have gotten overlooked in that situation was an opportunity to see that person engaging children as part of the interview process. Is that a possible overlook?
Yes, if they've had limited experience in terms of they haven't had, maybe they're new to the teaching profession or had only been someplace for a short period of time. Yeah, that's a challenge. And I think part of, too, as a leader, some leaders have difficulty, and I'm not saying it's fun, but they have difficulty terminating, non-renewing, nice people. Their heart's in the right place, that they do everything they can to do the job right. For whatever reason, it's just not working out. But you got to, as a leader, you got to make a change, because ultimately you got to do what's best for the students and not for the individual, the teacher. And I've worked with some leaders before that said, I just can't do it. I can't do it. That person's not going to have health insurance, and they have they're a lovely family. They've got 5 children. I just can't do that. And it's not fun, but ultimately you got to make the right decision.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you're really speaking to, yes, we need to maintain and build and curate relationships with the people in our buildings. And at the same time, our primary job is children. What's best for kids? And I was thinking of the, Learning First and other areas for which NAESP advocates. And it's about children, what they need, not the adult needs, although that becomes even more difficult in a smaller community where that teacher may have a spouse who is on city council or is the fire chief or is involved in Little League. And so it becomes a community rallying for this one person who don't know that this teacher is struggling. Is that?
Yeah, and many times, as you said, especially in a smaller community, it's not going to be a popular decision.
Right.
And there maybe the other faculty and staff members, this is a well-loved, liked person, and the community, they're involved in the community. And I'm not saying that shouldn't be considered overall.
Right.
In the decision-making process. I know have to give and take on certain things. But yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily a popularity contest. And, sometimes you're not going to win an election, sitting in the big seat, making the decisions and the role of the recommendation. We know that ultimately the Board of Education typically makes the final call. You can only recommend certain things. But I mean, it's not fun sometimes.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind as you were describing that is sometimes as principals, we want to offer support and we send in, I'm going to speak from my own experience. I think I sent in 3 or 4 different people to coach this teacher who I'll use having worked in Missouri for 20 years, bless their heart, because they were getting advice from 3 or 4 different people about how to engage and teach. And it was so confusing that it didn't get better at all. It got so much worse. What frustrated you? Or I guess I'm thinking of your 3 examples. So typically one of our questions is what frustrated you. So I want you to keep that in mind. As you think about these 3 examples, 1 with the association and 2 within a building, there may have been some common themes, and I'm wondering what may have frustrated you in that process.
I'm not sure I would characterize it as frustration. Challenging in which we've already talked about, recommending non-renewal for individuals who are good people, well-liked. Their heart's in the right place. They work extremely hard to try to do it the right way. They want to be a great teacher. And for whatever reason, whether if you call it teaching a gift, I'm not sure. And I haven't followed the person I have in mind. I haven't followed up to see, if they are still in the profession. Maybe they're no longer a teacher. That was challenging because, again, some people would say, well, as a leader, you're not a sensitive person. Well, just because you make recommendations that you don't necessarily want to make because you like the person doesn't mean you're not sensitive. Again, you just have to have a core belief that I have to do ultimately what's best for students. And so, again, I don't call it frustration. It does bother me to make decisions that impact the life.
Yeah.
Not only one person, but I've already mentioned the family.
You think of the ripple effect. Yeah. I would say to some extent that's a challenge, and that is frustrating in the sense of not individually frustrating of being angry as much as that tension internally because you want to be considered a human-centered leader that is compassionate and empathetic.
Yep.
And so that's hard. My last question is, in the end, what was something that was good that came out of these situations? I imagine that there was some learning that you had better practices moving forward as you were looking to hire people.
Some you just don't know. Again, you do your due diligence. I think it's important to plan, be very organized, looking at the pros, the cons of certainly employment. I'm thinking from an association perspective. And again, sometimes you just don't know. I mean, if we all can make decisions that 100% every time they were perfect, that goes back to the imperfect leadership piece and being flawed as an individual. Well, I guess some people would say that would be boring. I don't know. If every employment decision you made was 100%, that'd be great. That's not reality. I think just continue on in terms of doing all of the things the right way. Due diligence. I'm amazed by how some folks hire and never really thoroughly vet the individual. I know at the association, we work with the organization and we do a thorough background check, not just criminal, those type of things. So when a person says on their resume they graduated from college, well, okay, well, in the background check, they didn't graduate from college. I mean, it's like, and so when you question the person, it's like, well, yeah, I'm just a class or two short of that. Okay, I get that. Why you put that you graduated? So that's a character flaw for me. So I think you have to be very thorough before you hire somebody, because we know on the front end, do more work on the front end. And so hopefully you don't have to terminate non-renew people. But every decision, you do the best you can. In the end, I think in terms of the example I was thinking about, maybe lesson. But then again, if a person's never really had a job, how are you going to know how well they're going to do with classroom management?
I'm so glad you said that. That's an important piece, of course, right? Because one of the things that we're all trying to do is improve. And when I use the word diversity, it can be diversity of thought as well, in terms of how do you create a school that is reflective of the community where you work. And sometimes individuals have not had the teaching experience yet. And so are you not going to give them a job? However, at the same time, you might also say, you know what, why don't we go into a classroom? I'd love to watch you. They know in advance so they should be prepared to teach something, or just watch them engaging with kids. Are they shying away from them? And I never did that. I'm not saying that,
as you well know now. In many school districts, I mean,
right, they'll take anyone who
has a heartbeat. They have a job because there's a shortage in many areas, and some school districts have had full-time subs teaching or in the classroom because they can't find teachers.
Yeah, when I saw that some legislatures,
dynamic again.
Yeah, when they're allowing, and this is no disrespect to someone who drives a bus.
Yeah,
when there are some states that say, well, how about we allow you to teach too? So finish your round, then come teach. I think is incredibly problematic. So, but that's a whole nother podcast. That's a problematic leader. So, Earl, what advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
One, take advantage of diverse experiences as much as possible. Expand, enhance your skill set, certainly through professional learning. Relationships, critically important. Networking, not just with folks in the profession, outside the profession, whether folks, leaders in the community, political leaders, certainly mentors, role models. That's so important for aspiring leaders. But anytime you can put yourself in a situation that you can grow personally and professionally, you need to do it, whether it's taking a class, whether it's participating in a study program,
whether it's joining Rotary.
Yeah, at the time, you may not understand how this works. You never know until after the fact. You'll look back and say, that's why that's important. And you give an example, Peter, certainly through Rotary. I could go through the Rotary full-way test, and if we all live by the Rotary full-way test, then, the world would be a much better place. But
sure would.
Take advantage of every opportunity that you have is so important.
Our guest today was NAESP Executive Director Earl Franks. And Earl, I know your time is precious, and so having any of it is a real gift. And you started us off talking about the importance of sharing our stories with those in our community and outside of our community so that people will rally for our children. And so thank you so much for sharing your story. It means so much.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be with you and keep up the great work.
So we're back, Peter. Can I dig into this concept of working at the local level?
We can, although if it's okay, I'd like to first talk about this whole concept about student protests. And I'm really curious about that part because I really wrestled with that question around the time that we're in right now, the political climate that we're in, and the expectation that we're going to see protests from students.
When you were talking about students possibly protesting and the challenge to public education, and you gave a pretty clear examples both at the secondary and elementary level of what that might look like. And he basically said, yeah, that doesn't happen at the elementary level. But he said, we focus on, and this is where I thought this was sort of interesting. I'm like, I kind of like these categories. He said, we focus on community service, which we think is very important. Number 2 would be student leadership. 3rd would be citizenship. And 4 is school spirit. And I'm like, those are great. What do those mean to you, Superintendent Stiepelman?
I think they're pretty marvelous. I bristled a little bit when I heard school spirit, and that's maybe because I'm somewhat oppositional about anything that might be like the whole. It's interesting because I like an identity, and at the same time, I worry about the identity as well. Like, what does that mean for the person who doesn't always sense that they belong? Yeah. And so I'm often in my mind rooting for the underdog who doesn't feel as if they have been invited or that they, to some extent, are excluded because they are the counterpoint. They are the alternative thinker, dresser, So sometimes I get a little nervous about identity,
Everything about that, it just makes me so happy. It says the man in a Mets hat.
Right. I know.
From Long Island, right?
I know.
Long Island.
I know. In that case, I
who's saying we are one.
I know.
It's such a great contradictory.
Well, I was going to say, I'm sometimes,
it's so
a
good.
barrel full of contradictions.
This is the purpose of imperfect leadership right here. This example that you just gave. I care about we are one. We definitely are one. But also, what about all the kids that don't feel like they're part of that? And how do I get to that? And I'm for the underdog. Why? I was raised in Long Island a Mets fan.
This is my counterpoint to that, though. Not about the Mets fan thing. I've got no defense. I would say we are one doesn't mean we are the same. We are one is we are one mosaic.
I love that.
We're beautiful.
I truly love that. But this is why the categories I think work. Why I think Earl's categories do work, and that how we frame those, the story you tell as the leader matters a ton. The category helps it's like the metaphor that's easy enough for everybody to connect to.
So that was school spirit. That was the one piece. Community service, I'm all in. I can remember even when I was getting my teaching credential, the exam required us to write a persuasive essay about what did we think about compulsory service, community service as a graduation requirement.
I've got a question about the concept of compulsory community service. So I see the compliance part and I can see how that is not a motivator. But for a culture that actually isn't rooted in community service, it's not how the U.S. As Americans, it's not how doesn't mean we don't. There are plenty of people that do. And especially during tragedies, you'll see it like crazy. But it's the difference between, I think the cultural difference between tragedy happens, a bunch of people, thoughts and prayers. Then there's a bunch of people who showed up to give food, to help, literally be there. Here's my question. Does compulsory create discipline around it? Meaning when you are mandated to do something, even if you don't, at least you are more disciplined about doing a thing once.
In a few weeks, you're going to hear me talk to a leader named Damien Macbeth. He's in the UK. And I imagine he would say, as a graduation requirement, it will fail because it will be seen as, I have to do this.
Yeah.
If you embed it within the school culture of, in first grade, this is what we do as for our community, inside the school and outside the school. And second grade has maybe a different project, or to extension, maybe 5 years, they go from kindergarten all the way through fifth grade with the same project. So they have relationship. And then every time there's a new kindergarten class, they're starting with a different new project for the next 5 years. Then it becomes part of the school culture. And then possibly it just becomes part of one's daily expectation of, I'm responsible for myself and the collective.
I love that example. That's basically where I see possible change happening, is that often, and he even talks about this, I'm so interested to talk about this part when we get, maybe we'll talk about it at the end of the interview. And that is work on the local level.
Well, perfect timing. Okay, let's now talk about working at the local level.
All right. So he said, politicians for the most part are generally supportive of their local schools. They're not so supportive necessarily at the national level, but at the local level, they typically support and are very proud of what's going on in schools. I have seen this is where I was like, I'm in full agreement with this, Earl. Like, I feel I have seen more growth and work to improve leadership, instruction, alignment, etc., at schools across political divide at the local level, because truthfully, the school board members all want their schools to be good, regardless of who they voted for. They're very interested in making sure that their school systems are good. And honestly, some of that is because they have kids in the school system. Sometimes that's because their property value goes up if their schools are good.
That's so true.
So both of those things are true. And my experience at the local school board level, is that people are really working to try and improve their own schools.
Okay, so this is great. And I hope listeners will come back in a few weeks to hear Lori Weibel and Jonathan Voss, who are two consultants. One works primarily with Republican candidates and causes. The other works with more Democratic progressive causes. And the two of them talk to leaders about language. And what you just asked me is absolutely reflected in some of the work that they do. So for the first thing is this idea of, who do people trust? So when you think about voters, they trust teachers, they trust parents, and they trust parent organizations. And when it comes to schools, superintendents are far lower. And even below them are state and local officials, and below them, school boards, and below them, elected representatives, and below them, business leaders. The second slide that I would share with you it just backs up exactly what you said, is that when you ask the question, and it's been the same since 1981, do you think the nation as a whole, what would you give the grade for your public schools? And it's so low. And then when it says, how about your own community? Oh, my own community, much higher. So it is pervasive for, more than almost what is approaching 50 years, 45 years or so. And I think a big part of that is, who do you trust? People get their information from their friends and their neighbors. And so friends and neighbors say, I love this school. And then it's backed up by the teacher who has the school parties and has the newsletter and is calling you to say wonderful things about your child. My gosh, I'm going to give that an A, right? I love my school.
Yeah. Your descriptor of who has the most trust to who has the least trust seems like an inverted pyramid for who has the most power and who has the least power.
Ooh, yeah.
So the high levels of trust are here, and the business leaders are down here. And then if you flip it, this is where the least amount of power are the parents, students, and teachers as you go up.
Ooh, that's so profound. Yeah, they have the least power. They have the smallest voice in decision making. Yeah. Well, then what a great lesson for leaders to say, how do we leverage who has the most trust and give them better opportunities to make decisions.
Oh my goodness. So it makes me think of, hold on, pull it up. Moment. One moment.
While you're pulling that up,
yes.
here's something that Earl Franks said that I think aligns to your question, which is, he had a quote, which is, we always encourage school leaders to share positive things that are going on in their schools with the political leaders. And again, that's whether Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. So I do think there are opportunities to potentially influence the way that people think about schools nationally, or particularly at the state level about their community, is by making it known. Don't keep it a secret. And what I think I mentioned innovation, like innovation is just the way that people think differently about engaging their community and making the experience so fulfilling for children so that they are inspired and so that they aspire. Okay, so what does that make you think of? You were looking for something.
Yeah, I was basically when you were talking about the raising the voices of those, if these two pyramids are indeed inverted, right? And students, families, and teachers have a small role in decision making. Made me think of this quote by Ariana Presley, the U.S. House of Representatives from Massachusetts. And she said, the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power, driving the information, the policy making. That quote is exactly the same. That's the purpose. The people closest to the pain should be driving the decision making and policy making. And oftentimes that's not the truth. That's not what's happening. We don't have people close to the pain or the experience being even informing the decision making. And so that's where we get these crazy policies that feel like, why would we do that? Well, it's because the group of people that made it have never experienced this or that. Like, as an example, why are we one of the few countries that's monolingual in the world? Because we make policies that promote and continue monolingualism and don't indicate monolingualism bad. It's not about bad or good. It's that we don't have a way of understanding bilingual or multilingualism, much like other countries do.
Yes.
It's normed.
Although I will say the seal of biliteracy seems to be an initiative to disrupt that to some extent. It is approaching the wall and like banging on it, as opposed to what is a policy that serves as a wrecking ball that says, what an amazing country with how many languages spoken here?
And couldn't you argue that our national identity, the very purpose of our national identity, is the fact that we're the only country that is multiracial, multilingual, multicultural? We're basically one of the few in the world. Maybe I'll ask this question. We'll end on this question, although I do want to make one more question. And that is, what prevents principals, but superintendents too, from inviting their local politicians into schools?
It shouldn't.
I know, but how come it doesn't happen?
I would tell you that the associations at the state level that I talk to, pretty intentional about reminding superintendents to engage with their legislators, their local, those who represent them, as well as at the state level, and bring just information about what's going on in your school district, and then thank them for the service that they provide, particularly always keeping an eye on education. I mean, doing that in advance, it's kind of like calling parents to say, I met your kid today. What a great kid. Thank you so much for trusting us with your child. So that when you do have to call, they're like, oh, I already have good feelings about that. So they should absolutely do that. One of the things that I did as soup as well was we had quarterly meetings. We always had a legislative breakfast. We would also, the board would adopt legislative priorities, and we would share that with our local delegation to say, here are the things that are really important to our community right now. And then we would do that as a county. And then we went down almost every month just to visit, just to say hello. And it also paid off. It really did in so many ways.
Well, we obviously have the ability to encourage people to do this. What I think is really interesting is that it goes both ways, right? I'll speak for myself when I'm an administrator. I didn't think about it. I didn't think about inviting. It didn't even occur to me. But politicians too are looking to be invited. Basically, they're not considering it. They're doing their job day to day. Everybody is trying to do their best, and inviting someone to be a part of something helps that person feel like they belong.
I think it's perfectly said. And so for those who are listening, if they ever want to think about how to do that, I know you and I can help them do that. So
tell me this. I want to know where this comes from. ROTARY. We are. How did the song go?
Don't you know the MICKEY?
Oh, that's it. We are Rotary.
Yeah. It was unbelievable.
At some point, I would very much like to talk to you about the concept of Rotary and related to this local level advocacy support. What does it do? Why be a part of it? What's the thing? There's a song tells me that it's a thing.
Rotary is a pretty incredible organization and is responsible for the almost eradication of polio. And that is a big part of the work that they do. So the fact that Earl has dedicated so much time and his distinction in terms of what I noted has a lot to do with his own financial contributions to Rotary to make a difference internationally. So it speaks to who he is and his heart for wanting the world to be a better place.
That's interesting. That's
A
good.
healthier place, a safer place.
That's great.
All right. I'll see you next week.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast.